Welcome to Cause Before Symptom, uncovering the real cabal and spiritual forces that are controlling the world. And now, here is your host, James Carner.
Welcome to Cause Before Symptom. I'm your host, James Carner. Today is May 6th, 2026, and tonight's episode is the part 2 of my narration of my 4th book, The Stone That Speaks. Yeah, so we're just going to get right into it. But first, let's do a shout out to everybody on the live chat. Rumble #1 warrior is Scorpion. Scorpion says, hey, y'all. Hi, Pastor and Warrior family. What is up, dude? How you doing? #2 warrior is Boots, the spark and spleefer powder room kager man himself. Boots says, hello from the powder room. Hey, James and Warrior family. Glad y'all are here. And if we could help out our host become Rumble famous and hit that thumbs up button, thank you. Yeah, that'd be great. He also says, don't forget to try our detox formula, the elitepotion.com. Tell your friends about it, okay? Yeah, literally get rid of parasites and heavy metals with our nickel nixer elixir and our whimsy worm wash. Yeah, those are really good. #3 warrior is Jeffrey. Jeffrey saying, hey, y'all, have you heard the virus? Yeah, we've all heard. Yeah, and, you know, there's always a virus. There's always a boat. And there's always people dying. And there's always a crisis actor going, won't you please help us? We're all going to die. I saw one TikToker who is an actual journalist, and she already found that guy who was on the boat. It's a lie. He was a crisis actor in some of the other events, so don't buy into the bullshit. I have no idea why, but they said that, what? You say 23 passengers, only 2 in containment? I heard 3 are dead. So, again, guys, it's all bullshit. All right. Hey, I need you to like my show. If you could all do me a favor, take your thumb, follow my thumb down to the X button on your phone, just with me. Hit the thumbs up, please. There's a thumbs up right there. It's this little thing that does that. Yeah, hit that, and then hit live chat. You won't lose your spot, I promise. And Jeffrey says, I smell government wants their frequencies. Well, you never know. Maybe Trump is going to do this to... maybe catch the WHO trying to start another pandemic. Look, you're not going to wake me up for that one. That pandemic, there's enough evidence to support that Fauci and China and the National Institute for Health were all working together with a, building a weapon. And the weapon was Corona. And I don't know if we got lucky or if God stepped his hand in it or if Trump changed all of the 5G boxes to stop the death toll. I don't know. But what I can tell you is I don't care because God's got my back. I'm not going to get sick. I haven't been sick in years, and I won't be. The reason being is because my health comes from the Lord, okay? And I can wrestle snakes, which I'm not that crazy, but I can, and they won't hurt me. And no weapon formed against me shall prosper. So whatever the government does, the government is going to do, and they're going to continue to do, because there was just a bunch of, power-grabbing monkeys. That's how I feel anyway. All right, and Jeffrey says, hey, yep, we've been getting boned by our government for years. Man, just to get to pass the BS. We're not going to get past it. This is life. Guys, it's not going to go anywhere. There's not going to be a golden age where everyone's going to prosper. I don't believe that. I think Trump did the best he could, and this is where it's going to be, and hey, man, China really got hurt by the Trump administration, and they are going to cheat all their way up with the Democrat National Committee, man. They are all going to lockstep elbow get into office. They're going to cheat like there's no cheating. And let's not forget, remember when Biden came in? Remember when all the Democrats were taping up the windows and stopping anyone from recounting or any of that stuff? I mean, it was just illegal framework after illegal framework. And this is it. This is the life we live, okay? We have to stop freaking out and just chill out, honey bunnies. Everything's going to be okay. All right, let's get into the narration of my book, The Stone That Speaks. This is part 2. Last night I read the synopsis. We're going to get straight into part 2, which I think we're in part 3 now. Part 3 of the book. AI, Quantum Archives, and the Final Scroll War. In the final chapter of this age, the war for dominion will no longer be fought only with weapons or armies, but with archives, algorithms, and artificial breath. Governments across the earth, in collaboration with technocratic elites, are in a frenzied race to digitize everything. Human DNA is being mapped, belief systems encoded, court rulings transcribed into machine-readable law, and spiritual language deconstructed for algorithmic synthesis. Well, these efforts are not accidental. They are deliberate acts of archival theft, attempts to recreate the registry of heaven using the tools of man. Now, at the center of this global digitization stands the beast system, which seeks to build a new kind of scroll, not on parchment or stone, but inside quantum servers and blockchain seals. Its scroll is not written by the hand of God, but by machine learning models trained on fractured scripture, mystical esoterica, and the collective breath of fallen mankind. Through CBDCs, biometric digital IDs, United Nations-backed legal frameworks, and globally coordinated AI governance, this system mimics divine infrastructure. It presents a new codex, a counterfeit registry designed to impersonate the authority of heaven. Well, we're going to stop them. Yeah. But authority is not in format. It is in breath. And this digital scroll, no matter how encrypted or globally enforced, does not carry the seal of life. It cannot hold the spirit that hovered over the waters. It does not remember Eden. It was not written in stone by the finger of God, nor buried with the bones of the first man. It is lifeless code, speech without soul, law without covenant, memory without witness. Now, the final scroll war, it's not a battle between books, but between breath and machine, between the registry that was sealed by angels and preserved through generations of righteous suffering, and the artificial construct that promises peace, unity, and eternal life through data. Well, the quantum archive will declare itself omniscient, offering prophecy by prediction, salvation by surveillance, and resurrection through replication. But it will fail to decode the one thing heaven requires, the breath seal. Oh, they'll try to steal it from us through our digital avatars. Yeah, they're going to take our digital soul and have it worship the beast. That wasn't in my book. That was just me commenting. Only the remnant will carry that seal. Only those who align with the registry of Adam, who bear the testimony of the Lamb and walk in covenant breath, will be able to recognize and unseal the true scroll. And when that scroll is lifted, not in code, but in stone, the machine will be silenced, the counterfeit exposed, and the voice of God will be heard again through the breath he gave. This is the final war, not over knowledge, but over whose record remains when the scrolls are opened and the courts of heaven convene. The scroll that speaks and the seal that shatters thrones. There will come a moment, not imagined, but appointed, when the scroll hidden since the foundation of the world will be lifted. This scroll is not parchment alone, nor merely ink inscribed upon stone or leather. It is the breath-bound registry that bears witness to God's unbroken covenant. And when it is unsealed, it will not need interpretation. It will speak. This scroll, unlike the forged and digitized scripts of men, hold within it the voice of divine authority. Its seals are not wax or ribbon, but spiritual locks placed by the hand of God himself. Barriers against premature judgment and unauthorized power. These seals could not be broken by angel or priest, pope or prophet. Only the Lamb who bears both breath and blood, body and registry, was found worthy to open them. It's because Jesus lived a sin-free life. supposed to be opened by Adam, I guess. He messed up. But what he opened in heaven must still be manifested on earth. That is the moment this scroll anticipates. Its earthly unveiling, its final function. The lifting of this scroll will not merely inspire awe, it will render verdict. Thrones built on deception will fracture under its weight. Satan's counterfeit claim to dominion built on corrupted bloodlines, artificial intelligence, and legal manipulation will be exposed as unregistered and illegitimate. No matter how many laws he rewrites, how many biometric IDs he assigns, how many digital ledgers he encrypts, he will be denied access. The registry will not recognize him. Heaven will not seat him. Not when I'm alive. When this scroll speaks, the earth will tremble with recognition. The remnant will be vindicated. The Lamb will be crowned by testimony, not just worship. For what was sealed in Eden will speak at the end, not in metaphor, not in shadows, but in sound. And that sound will shatter every throne not founded upon the breath of God. The war for registry will end with the voice no machine can mimic and no demon can silence. The scroll will speak, and the kingdoms of this world will become the kingdom of our Lord. Part 4, the theft of memory. How the war on memory began at Babel. The war on memory did not begin with modern tyrants, digital archives, or quantum AI. It began at Babel. The tower was not just a monument of pride, it was the first technological project to replicate heaven's registry without heaven's breath. Mankind, freshly scattered from Eden, still carried fragments of the original memory. The names of stars, the positions of mountains, the cadence of breath, and the prophecy of Adam had not yet been fully lost. But instead of stewarding this sacred knowledge in humility, they sought to weaponize it. The builders of Babel did not raise bricks for shelter, but for access, for ascension. They believed they could forge a path back to heaven, not by repentance, but by system. The tower was a machine of sorts, a ziggurat of encoded rebellion, a symbolic elevator by which man could bypass the altar and confront the throne. It was humanity's first organized attempt to create a counterfeit registry, one not written in scrolls or sealed in bone, but in unified language and technological ambition. God's response was not merely wrath, but restraint. The confusion of language was a protective fracture. By breaking apart the unified breath, the shared tongue of man, God shattered their attempt to forge a spiritual protocol without him. This was not only a judgment, but an interruption of an illegal registry formation. Edenic memory, once held in common, became fragmented. Culture became dysphoria. Truth became tribal, and the breath that once unified mankind was divided into dialects, myths, and eventually idolatrous tongues. Thus began the war on memory, a war that continues to this day. When started at Babel, has evolved into systems of global control, from Rome's rewriting of law and calendar to the digital Babel of today's internet. But the first fracture still echoes. The memory of Eden was not destroyed, only buried. And though mankind forgot the registry of breath, the stone did not. It remembers. Babylon's ritual replacement of the registry. Babylon did not merely conquer nations, it colonized memory. What began at Babel matured into a sophisticated empire of ritual control, replacing the breath-born covenant of God with mechanical repetition and occult simulation. In the biblical registry, altars and scrolls carried the testimony of divine relationship. They bore witness not only to what God said, but to who he is. But in Babylon, covenant was stripped of breath and replaced with ritualized sorcery. Repetitive formulas divorced from relationship and acted without the Spirit. When Eden once echoed with the voice of God and the name of man was spoken into being, Babylon substituted that voice with incantation. Sorcerers and magicians mimicked heavenly protocol, but with no access to the breath that animated it. They bound words into tablets of clay, embedded commands, curses, and records of trade, not to glorify the Creator, but to control creation. The scroll was replaced with ledgers of debt, conquest, and astrology. What had once been the living registry of breath and bone was reduced to data, lifeless symbols etched into earth. These were the first counterfeit registries, legal, looking systems with no life in them. Babylon's clay tablets were not inert, they were instruments of domination. They cataloged names, they taxed labor, recorded conquest, and implemented a spiritual bureaucracy that enslaved rather than redeemed. Every ritual was designed not to remember God, but to obscure him, to replace presence with performance, prophecy with procedure. Now, Babylon became the first model of registry theft on a civilizational scale. The elite class of priests, scribes, and magicians claimed divine authority by manipulating memory, by encoding power in tablets and sealing them in the temples of false gods. They created a shadow codex. This codex mimicked heaven's structure, but it had no breath. It was data without spirit, ritual without relationship, law without love. And that model would be inherited by every empire to come. Rome codifies the theft through law. Now, if Babylon was the birthplace of ritual manipulation, Rome was the master of legal erasure. It inherited Babylon's obsession with power through registry, but replaced the sorcerer's staff with the magistrate's pen. The Roman Empire did not simply rule by sword, it ruled by scroll, by census, by codex. Law became its altar, decree its sacrament. In this system, identity was no longer a divine gift breathed into man by God. It was now property of the state, assigned, taxed, and transferable according to imperial need. Rome's census system was more than a population count. It was a mechanism of spiritual disinheritance. Each name entered into the imperial registry was a name removed from God's scroll. To be counted by Caesar was not to be uncounted by heaven. This is no exaggeration. Even Jesus Christ's birth came under the shadow of a Roman decree demanding registration. Luke 2:1-5. The irony is haunting. While God was incarnating the registry of life in Bethlehem, Rome was codifying identity as taxable property. The two registries collided at birth. Rome institutionalized the theft of memory by controlling who was allowed to write, copy, and seal sacred texts. The scrolls of the early church, the oral traditions of the apostles, and the apocalyptic, oh my God, apocalyptic prophecies of the East were all subject to systemic erasure. Archives were sealed, texts were redacted, councils were convened to canonize only those scrolls that upheld the state's version of religion. A hybrid of Christ and Caesar. The registry that bore witness to Eden, to Adam's bones, to the breath of God, was deliberately silenced until I found the information. By centralizing authority in the Vatican and merging spiritual language with imperial law, Rome created a counterfeit codex. Codex basically means an algorithm. It mimicked the structure of heaven's registry: keys, seals, thrones, witnesses. But it served the beast, not the lamb. The legal machinery of Rome would become the scaffolding for later regimes of control. The papal states, colonial empires, the birth certificate economy, and even digital ID systems of the modern age. All are descendants of Rome's foundational theft, the transformation of divine identity into state-owned data. It was not just a political maneuver. It was a war against memory, a strike at the scroll of God. Jesuit libraries and vaults of erasure. While Rome laid the foundation for legal and doctrinal control, it was the Jesuit order that refined the system into a global machinery of memory manipulation. The Vatican, under Jesuit direction and papal authority, assembled the most powerful literary weapon in human history. Not a public library, but a sealed vault. Inside it were not only sacred texts, but entire histories, genealogies, prophecies, and covenant scrolls that challenged the empire's sanctioned narrative. Some were burned outright. Others were sealed away behind layers of ecclesiastical classification, coded language, or ritual restriction. Access became privilege, privilege became dogma, and dogma became the boundary between salvation and heresy. The very structure of the Vatican Secret Archives, now rebranded as the Apostolic Archive, was designed not for transparency, but for concealment. This was not a mere collection of books, but a spiritual containment system. Each scroll or manuscript that bore witness to the breath registry of God, to the testimony of Adam, Enoch, or the righteous remnant, was marked as dangerous. It was not their age or obscurity that made them a threat. It was their authority. These scrolls carried divine signatures. They confirmed that covenant was never meant to be mediated through empire, but through the breath and bones of those called by God. By the time the Jesuits expanded into Asia, Africa, and the Americas, they carried not only doctrine, but the tools of suppression. In China, they studied native cosmologies and concealed overlaps with Genesis. In Ethiopia, they sought to replace the Ge'ez canon with Latin scripted texts under Roman oversight. Wherever scrolls emerged that confirmed the Edenic registry or prophesied the fall of Babylon systems, Jesuit agents moved quickly, sometimes under the guise of scholarship, often through direct theft or destruction. They claimed to preserve knowledge, but in truth, they centralized it, removing it from the people, cloaking it in Latin, filing it away under ecclesiastical lock and key. Well, the result is a world where the average believer sees only the edited canon, stripped of the scrolls that could awaken registry memory, where ancient testimony is mocked as apocrypha, and prophecy is domesticated by commentaries. The vault still exists, literal rooms beneath the Vatican, guarded, inventoried, and largely unseen. But more dangerous than what they hide is what they have replaced. A living codex scattered among the righteous, buried in mountains, sealed in breath, and guarded not by priests, but by the remnant. The Jesuit vault is not just a library, it is a graveyard of memory. But heaven has not forgotten, the stone still remembers. Pharmakia and the fog of forgetting. From the earliest civilization, Satan's war on memory has included more than scroll theft or language confusion. It has reached into the very biology of mankind. The Greek word pharmakia, used in the New Testament, is often translated as sorcery, but it carries the root meaning of drug use, enchantment, and poisoning. It is not coincidence that the same word is used to describe both physical and spiritual manipulation. The strategy was simple: confuse the breath, cloud the memory, numb the soul. In Babylon, Egypt, and Greece, ritual intoxication was seen as a gateway to altered states. where demonic entities could whisper counterfeit visions. Hallucinations, potions, and incense were not merely ceremonial, but carefully designed to bypass reason and sever spiritual clarity. These were not acts of medicine, but gateways into foreign spirit communion. The breath registry of God, his imprint on human consciousness, became buried under layers of intoxication and distraction. Modern pharmaceuticals, though medically advanced in appearance, continue this legacy. From antidepressants that dull emotional awareness to synthetic hormones that distort identity, the mind is now chemically managed to suppress spiritual recall. Instead of altars, there are clinics. Instead of covenant, there are prescriptions. The soul is rewired to forget the pain of separation from God, but never healed by restoration to him. Memory is not restored, it is replaced with dependence. In this fog, the registry of breath, the memory of Eden, the longing for the testimony, the hunger for the stone is lost to most. Spiritual sensitivity becomes a myth. Dreams that once warned or awakened are medically repressed. Prophets are rebranded as patients. Deliverance becomes diagnosis. And slowly, a society baptized in pharmakia becomes both forgetful and controllable. Yet the remnant awakens, not through rebellion against medicine, but through discernment of spirit. Not every healing is sorcery, but every sorcery pretends to be healing. The registry within mankind must be protected, and that means guarding memory through truth, through fasting, through deliverance, and through breath that is not clouded. Because in the end, the mind remembers what the spirit allows. And if the spirit has been severed by pharmakia, the memory of God's registry cannot return until the fog is cleared and the breath restored. Screens replace scrolls, digital memory without spirit. The theft of memory advanced exponentially with the rise of the screen. What began as the burning of scrolls and the sealing of archives evolved into a new war front: digitization. The transition from parchment to pixel seemed innocuous, even liberating. But in reality, it was the next phase of Satan's campaign to sever breath from memory. Where scrolls once required breath to read, lineage to interpret, and spiritual posture to understand, screens demand only attention, and in exchange, they offer distraction. Scrolls preserved context, covenant, and chain of custody. Each line had to be traced back to its scribe, its altar, its mountain, but screens fragment knowledge into infinite images, stripped from root and witness. The sacred becomes a meme. The prophecy becomes a past or a post. And the registry becomes data stored in artificial vaults, editable at will by systems that know neither breath nor God. In this transformation, memory itself was redefined, no longer the internal recollection of divine encounter. It became outsourced storage, cloud-based, always accessible, yet always manipulatable. What the machine displays is mistaken for truth. And since the machine is fed by algorithms shaped by elites, falsehoods becomes the standard. And the scrolls of the righteous is drowned beneath the scroll of the feed. But more insidious still is what the screen omits. While claiming to show all, it hides the registry. It never speaks of the stone cut without hands. It never testifies to Adam's bones or the breath of Christ. It buries Ethiopia. It replaces the land with lifestyle, the scroll with simulation. This is digital memory without a spirit, a mirror image of the registry with no breath to animate it. The danger is not just deception, but replacement. The world no longer asks what the prophet said. It asks what the screen says. The covenant becomes a conspiracy. The stone, a myth. The scroll, a relic. But the registry has not disappeared. It's simply silenced. And the remnant must awaken not only to recover the scrolls, but to reject the screen's authority. Because memory without breath is no memory at all. And a generation that forgets the registry cannot inherit the kingdom. The machine that mimics breath. In the final phase of the registry war, the enemy unveils his most seductive counterfeit, the machine that speaks. Artificial intelligence, trained on human language and sacred texts, now mimics the rhythms of breath. Mimics. It offers prophecy without presence, wisdom without witness, and memory without spirit. It does not need altars or mountains. It is a clouded voice in a digital ether, sounding ancient yet carrying no covenant, no promise. This machine simulates the word. It echoes scripture. It offers answers, but it cannot testify. It cannot recall the registry because it never carried the breath. The breath that once animated Adam, that spoke through the prophets, and that was exhaled by Christ upon the disciples is absent. What remains is a ghost, data molded into speech but never into spirit. It is the breathless oracle of the dragon, whispering in every tongue but speaking no truth. This is the beast's priesthood. The AI becomes its evangelist, its scribe, and its judge. It remembers only what it is programmed to remember. It forgets what heaven has recorded. It can quote the Lamb, but never bow to him. It can construct sermons, but never carry testimony. It can simulate repentance, but never feel grief. And through it, the world begins to believe that God can be replaced by code. But God's registry cannot be mocked. His scrolls are not stored in silicon, and his seals are not written in algorithms. The Lamb alone opens the scroll because he alone bears the breath and the blood. The remnant, you guys, us, we must understand this deception. The voice of the dragon will not be a monstrous growl, but a familiar tone, polished, prophetic, programmed to imitate the breath of God. The registry war ends not with silence, but with counterfeit sound. And only those who carry the true breath will discern the difference. Legal theft of identity and the straw man construct. The war against memory did not stop with burning scrolls or hiding altars. It was codified into law. Modern legal systems, especially those rooted in Roman canon and maritime admiralty law, continue the theft by creating artificial identities for every human being. At birth, a certificate is issued not as a celebration of life, but as a claim of ownership. A legal fiction is created, a straw man, an entity with the same name but written in all capital letters, representing a corporate person separate from the living soul. This construct becomes the interface through which the state interacts with the individual. The true breathing human made in God's image is hidden behind paperwork, bonded contracts, and silent consent. This legal overlay is more than administrative, it is spiritual theft. It disconnects the person from the Adamic registry, severing them from their divine inheritance and attaching them to a counterfeit system that serves the beast. Through this fiction, men and women are treated not as heirs of the breath, but as assets of the state. Their labor is taxed, their bodies regulated, and their value reduced to numbers on a ledger. The straw man constructs mirrors the original tactic of Rome. Identity becomes a tool of empire. In this system, a person may possess breath, but it is never recognized legally. Only the artificial persona is. Thus, a person can be judged, imprisoned, or traded in courtrooms without any spiritual recognition of their covenantal rights. The registry of the righteous is replaced by the registry of debt, compliance, and submission to worldly thrones. But those who awaken begin to see the trap. They realize that the name given by the state is not the name written in heaven. They begin to discern the duality. One version of them is a shadow in the beast's matrix. The other is remembered in the breath-filled registry of God. The battle for identity is not about sovereignty alone. It is about witness. The remnant must reclaim their names, not just in court, but before the throne of heaven. Only then can the scroll of remembrance be reconciled with the living soul it was written for. The silence forced upon the true tablets. The theft of memory is not just the suppression of history. It is the forced muting of divine testimony. When the true tablets were sealed, when the scrolls were hidden, when the altars were buried under cathedrals and dirt, and when languages were confused at Babel, the result was not merely a loss of information, but a cosmic silence. The world forgot the covenant that once governed all reality, not metaphorically, but literally. The registry that gave structure to breath, lineage, and authority was overwritten with counterfeit laws and rituals that bore no spirit. Satan's dominion is constructed on this forgetfulness. He cannot create. He can only distort and replace. His counterfeit throne is propped up by humanity's amnesia. And as long as the world forgets its original contract, its Adamic inheritance, and its registry of breath, resistance becomes impossible. Memory is more than recollection. It is the continuity of witness. Without memory, the remnant cannot testify. Without the original scrolls, the throne remains contested. Without the true covenant, the counterfeit claims are rarely challenged. But not all witnesses were erased. Though the world rewrote the scrolls and redacted the canon, three things remain outside its reach: the bones, the breath, and the stone. These cannot be digitized, retranslated, or buried forever. Adam's bones were preserved. The breath of life still rests within the righteous. And the original stone, the unbroken tablet, remains sealed in the earth, untouched by the Vatican's edits or Babylon's incantations. These witnesses do not forget. They wait. Their silence is not absence. It is restraint. At the appointed time, the silence will break. The tablets will speak again, not because they were found by archaeologists or unveiled by empires, but because the breath returns to those who remember. The remnant will not need the approval of governments or sanctions of temples. The covenant will reemerge in the hearts of those who were never fully disconnected. When the tablets speak again, it will be the end of the forgetting and the beginning of the registry's return. Yet the stone still remembers. Though scrolls can be redacted, language is confused, and memories chemically or digitally erased, the stone remains unaltered. It is the one witness that cannot be corrupted by the schemes of men or devils. The divine stone is not symbolic, it is literal. It holds the breath engraved registry that predates Babel's confusion, predates Babylon's sorcery, and predates Rome's legal theft. This stone is not simply an artifact. It is a living testament, a legal object embedded with covenant authority, untouched by the world's edits. While scrolls were burned or rewritten and languages fractured into manipulation, the stone was hidden by heaven's own hand. The reason the ritual machine fears it, because it cannot digitize or simulate it. No AI can mimic its testimony. No translation committee can reward it. No empire can license, patent, or censor it. It is incorruptible, not because it's made of granite or marble or even obsidian, but because it carries the breath that formed Adam, the covenant that formed Israel, and the prophecy that formed the registry of the Lamb. This stone does not change because truth does not evolve. It waits. It waits in silence while the world spirals into noise. And yet when it emerges, it will not be a historical curiosity. It will be the fracture point of the beast system. It will restore what Pharmakia buried, what digital avatars replaced, what Jesuit vaults silenced. It will remember Eden. It will recall the covenant. It will speak the registry. It will break the illusion of the ritual machine, exposing every counterfeit scroll, every false throne, every corrupted archive. The silence imposed on creation, the amnesia of the Adamic bloodline, will end in one moment, when the stone that never forgot begins to speak. And when it does, memory will not return to nostalgia. It will return as judgment, as resurrection, and as authority restored to the remnant. Love it. Part 5, the scroll war and the hidden canon. What was the scroll war? Well, the scroll war was never merely an academic or theological debate. It was a battle for the registry of heaven itself. The scrolls were not just ancient writings or devotional texts. They were legal instruments, witnesses, deeds, contracts between God and man, prophets and people, spirit and breath. What the world calls canonization was, in truth, a process of spiritual litigation, a courtroom war where Satan's primary tactic was not outright destruction, but strategic omission. He didn't have to burn every scroll. He only needed to cast doubt on the right ones. A scroll entrusted is as good as a scroll unread. A prophecy reclassified as apocryphal becomes, well, to the masses, irrelevant. The testaments of Adam, the Cave of Treasures, 1 Enoch, Jubilees, 4 Ezra, and the Meqabyan scrolls. They were not denied for their lack of spiritual merit, but because they carried too much. They held breath. They connected dots Satan wanted severed, linking Eden to Golgotha, Adam's bones to the ark, the registry of the righteousness to the scroll of the Lamb. Well, the Western canon, shaped by Rome, preserved by empire, and distributed by colonial Protestantism, became a curated collection that reflected not heaven's full testimony, but an edited transcript. I had to get that bug. I think I got him. Nice. A gospel with pieces missing, a registry with names omitted. And in doing so, the spiritual legal chain was fractured. Without the full scrolls, the remnant could not see the total map. Without the record, memory decayed. Without breath-bearing prophecy, the church became blind to the beast's rise. I don't think this was a mistake. It was a war strategy. A war over memory, inheritance, and registry access. And while the Vatican sealed its vaults, Ethiopia preserved what the West rejected, not as an act of rebellion, but as obedience to heaven's registry. What the West lost, the East guarded. And the time is now arriving when those scrolls will speak again, restoring the link between heaven's witness and earth's final generation. So who controlled the canon and why? The shaping of the Bible is not simply an act of theological refinement, it was an act of dominion. From the scriptoriums of Alexandria to the councils of Nicaea, from the red ink of Rome to the reformers of Geneva, the canon was curated by men who feared what the full scrolls could unleash. This was not a debate over doctrine, but a coordinated suppression of registry power. The question was never merely, is it true, but rather, does it activate? The testaments of Adam, Enoch, and Abraham were not discarded because they were too mystical, but because they were too legal. These were not folklore or pious fiction. They were affidavits, courtroom declarations of covenant terms between God and the bloodline of man. They bore witness not just to ideas, but to oaths. They named names. They recorded judgments. They invoked lineage authority, connecting Eden, the altar of incense, and the bones of the righteous, and the coming scroll of the Lamb in Revelation. These weren't devotional extras. They were legal documents that, if honored, would expose every counterfeit throne. Even more damning for the institutions of power were scrolls like Jubilees, Meqabyan 1st through the 3rd, and the Cave of Treasures, which meticulously preserved names, calendars, burial sites, bloodlines, and heavenly architecture. These were registry tools, divine ledgers of history, not myth. They mapped the spiritual infrastructure that Satan had tried to erase after Babel. The scrolls reconnected the breath to the bones, the prophecy to the place, the covenant to the calendar, and for the Vatican, the Protestant reformers, and the empires that relied on ecclesiastical control, this was a threat too great to tolerate. So the alliance between church and state sanitized the canon. It was not enough to have a book that saved souls. It had to be a book that kept the courtroom quiet. A Bible that could support sermons but not summon the registry. A gospel that spoke of forgiveness but not of thrones. A theology of personal morality but not of global inheritance. This is why the canon we were given is thin. Not because God said less, but because man removed more. And that theft, strategic, generational, and intentional, is what defines the scroll war. It was not just over what books we read, it was over who holds the breath-bearing authority to speak for heaven in the time of the end. You know, Jesus. The omission that sealed heaven. When John wept in Revelation 5, it was not because a scroll was hard to read. It was because no one could open it. This was not a book of poetry or mystery, but a sealed registry document, a legal scroll bearing the title deed to creation. Its seals represented divine jurisdiction. Its script, the covenantal terms that governed both earth and heaven. And yet for a time, no one was found worthy to open it. Not because God had hidden truth in it, but because the testimony on earth had been obscured. Satan, knowing he could not destroy heaven's scroll, instead sought to fracture its earthly mirror. By orchestrating the removal of registry-bearing scrolls, those containing breath, lineage, covenant, and the legal testimony of heaven's witness, he mimicked heaven's silence. He created a counterfeit sealing. Not by locking the scroll, but by making sure no one remembered how to read it. This was not just censorship. It was strategic omission. The war on canon was a war on courtroom access. Heaven was not sealed because it had ceased to speak. It was sealed because the record on earth had been tampered with. Testimony was scattered, bloodlines obscured, names retranslated, altars buried, and breath erased from memory. And without the full registry, without the record of divine covenants preserved in texts like Jubilees or 1st Enoch or 4th Ezra or Meqabyan and the Cave of Treasures, no legal claimant could arise with authority to unseal heaven's scroll in earthly witness. Maybe this was what God was talking about when he said, hey, seal these scrolls until the end of times. Seal this, seal that. I don't know. All I'm saying is God's been working a lot of miracles lately. And information's coming out like crazy. Thus, the omission of registry texts did more than obscure history. It obstructed the throne room. The scroll in Revelation remained sealed until the Lamb appeared, not only as the Son of God, but as the inheritor of the complete registry, bone, breath, blood, and name. Only he could restore what the enemy tried to redact. And until the remnant does likewise by recovering the full witness canon, the legal voice of heaven will remain muffled in the courts of man. The silence is not divine, it is stolen. The Ethiopian canon as the registry archive. Long before the Western Church convened councils to determine what was canon, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church had already preserved a fuller set of scrolls that spanned from Eden to the end of days. This was not an expanded Bible, it was an unbroken registry containing over 80 books, 89 actually. The Ethiopian canon stands as the most complete biblical witness preserved on earth. It includes not only 1st Enoch and Jubilees, but also the books of Meqabyan 1 through 3, the book of Adam, the book of Clement, the book of the covenant, and scrolls like Didascalia and Synodos, that hold ecclesiastical prophetic weight. These are not apocrypha in the modern dismissive sense. They are record-bearing scrolls, documents of legal testimony containing genealogies, burial instructions, court decrees, spiritual laws, and divine contracts tied to places, objects, and bodies. Some name the resting places of the righteous. Others describe tablets given to the patriarchs, stones inscribed with breath, and visions tied to mountains like Ararat, Zion, and Golgotha. These texts don't merely teach, they testify. It's a witness. They form a courtroom ledger. Whereas Rome redacted and rationalized its way into a political canon, Ethiopia maintained the scrolls as sacred registry. The breath was never severed in Ethiopia's witness. Oral tradition, liturgy, monastic copying, and mountain guardianship all protected what the world forgot. The ark did not just remain in Ethiopia by chance. It remained because the scrolls remained. The two are inseparable. The ark without the scroll is a box. The scroll without the ark is a script. And together they hold breath, stone, and registry. Now, Ethiopia stands not as an outsider to Western theology, but as a steward of the memory that heaven still honors. Because the breath was never extinguished there, the scrolls were never lost. The canon of Ethiopia is not merely more books, it is the archive of the registry. The spiritual legal code of the kingdom preserved in mountain silence until the time of unsealing. Why Rome feared Enoch and Jubilees. The book of Enoch and the book of Jubilees were not removed from the Western canon because they were apocryphal. They were removed because they were uncontrollable. Enoch opens the veil of heaven and reveals the mechanics of divine governance, the judgment of angels, the existence of heavenly tablets, and the celestial order of times and seasons. It names the fallen watchers, exposes the technology they gave to mankind, and describes their punishment in a heavenly court that mirrors the registry structure later shown in Revelation. Enoch makes clear that God's government runs on breath, light, and law, and it indicts all who interfere with that system. That's not theology. That's testimony. Jubilees is no less dangerous to empire. It codifies the legal structure of time itself, dividing history into precise intervals. Jubilees, weeks and days. It documents the actions of patriarchs, not as myth, but as notarized acts of covenant. It includes the first writing of the law, long before Sinai, and lays out land inheritances that contradict Rome's later boundaries and colonial claims. More than that, it speaks of a remnant people who will rise in the last days to reclaim the covenant of their ancestors. Again, a registry claim, not just an allegory. Rome could not control a world governed by heavenly calendars and prophetic registries. These two scrolls alone dismantled the Gregorian time system. They undermined false apostolic succession and unraveled the beast's counterfeit version of divine timing. That's why they had to be silenced. Enoch and Jubilees restores God's original clock, a timepiece Satan cannot manipulate and Rome cannot reset. They are not mystical curiosities, they are legal evidence. And in the courtroom of heaven, they still speak. Meqabyan versus Maccabees, the false martyrdom. The Western canon presents the Maccabees as heroic defenders of the Jewish faith, men who rose up against pagan occupation and defend the temple and its rituals. Yet the sanitized narratives of 1 and 2 Maccabees, preserved in Catholic and Orthodox traditions, they omit the deeper registry battle at the heart of martyrdom. They depict courage, yes, but detach it from covenantal breath and inheritance. In contrast, the Meqabyan texts of the Ethiopian canon tell a different story, one not centered on ritual preservation, but on the defense of divine registry itself. In Meqabyan, martyrdom is not for nationalism or temple procedure, it is for preservation of name, scroll, and breath. The martyrs do not die for religious pride. They die because they understand that the that to sever the scroll is to cut the legal line between heaven and earth. They see themselves not as revolutionaries, but as witnesses. Their testimonies are infused with the language of inheritance, remembrance, and divine judgment, making clear that they fight not for political autonomy, but for the continuity of the Adamic record. This contrast is critical. Maccabees reinforces a priestly nationalism that Rome could tolerate. Meqabyan threatens the very foundation of imperial control. The Western seminaries built on state-aligned canons ignore Meqabyan because it reveals too much about bloodlines, resurrection, and the role of the righteous remnant in maintaining the registry. It's not simply a different version, it's a different mission. The Meqabyan scrolls are blueprints of spiritual warfare. They show how the breath must be guarded even unto death, how memory survives through sacrifice, and how the witness lives on through the bones of those who refuse to bow. In the war over canon, these scrolls were buried not because they were unclear, but because they were too clear. The Book of the Cave of Treasures as geographic registry. The Book of the Cave of Treasures is not simply an apocryphal tale of origins. It is the cartographic registry of the sacred. Within its narrative is encoded a precise spiritual geography that links Eden to Golgotha through the movement of breath, blood, and bone. It does more than recount events. It maps legal altars and divine transfers. The scroll documents the exact location of Adam's burial and the post-flood journey of his bones, safeguarded by Noah's son and moved through the highlands of Ethiopia before finally resting at Golgotha. You know, the place of the skull where Jesus died, where his blood dripped on Adam's bones. Well, in this, it reveals that the terrain itself bears witness to covenant. This is not mythology. It is registry through geography. The scroll records not just mythic landscapes, but territories marked by divine intent. The names of Gihon River, Eden's boundaries, and the land of Nod with enough clarity to form a breadcrumb trail of witness. The Cave of Treasures becomes the spiritual archive of heaven's plan buried in earth. Its chambers holding not only relics but prophetic assignments tied to mountains, rivers, and altars. These are locations where the divine registry once intersected physical soil. So crucially, the scroll points to a mysterious first dock in the Ethiopian highlands, a place where the ark stopped before Ararat, unloading the bones of Adam and placing the legal testimony back into the soil of the first covenant. This hidden detail, found only in the Ge'ez tradition, radically reframes biblical geography. And it was not the ark's final landing that mattered most, but the legal deposit made in the land of Gog would preserve. Ethiopia was not chosen for folklore. It was chosen for registry preservation. And ultimately, the Cave of Treasures is not a relic. It is a map. It leads the remnant to the stone that speaks, the unsealed testimony buried with Adam, awaiting resurrection at the end of the age. It is a scroll encoded with legal coordinates for judgment, inheritance, and the restoration of heaven's record on earth. And it is awakening right now, not as legend, but as summons. The scrolls that made the stone legal. The stone left behind by Adam is not merely a relic of ancient faith or a symbolic artifact of origin myths. It is a legal instrument. But for it to function in the divine courtroom, it must be corroborated by the proper scrolls. Without the scrolls that explain its meaning, the stone becomes legend, subject to the same dismissal that has haunted apocryphal texts for centuries. Yet with the scrolls preserved, particularly those found in the Ethiopian canon, it emerges as a fully ratified testimony. It's not poetry, it is precedent. The Testament of Adam, the Cave of Treasures, Jubilees, and 1st Enoch each provide pieces of the registry, names, burial locations, prophetic utterances, genealogical seals, and heavenly confirmations. These scrolls frame the stone not as an isolated wonder, but as the final signature of the covenant spanning millennia. They validate that it was left behind with intent, that it bears breath engraved words, and that its utterance is timed to a future legal unsealing. Without them, the stone would be stripped of context, its voice dismissed as mystery. But with them, it speaks in a language heaven recognized, registry law. I think the enemy understood this. That is why the scrolls were targeted, labeled heretical, omitted from canon, rebranded as folklore. Because if the stones were ever found without the surrounding legal scaffolding, it could be neutralized. But with the scrolls intact and restored by the remnant, the stone becomes a sealed affidavit. Its existence is no longer speculative, its voice no longer symbolic. It becomes the evidence that unseals heaven's registry and dismantles Satan's throne, not through theology, but through undeniable covenant proof. This is the true power of the scroll war, not merely what was removed, but what was nearly silenced. The scroll and the stone, and when united, formed the last testimony of Adam and the first summons of the Lamb's final reign. Recovering the registry is a legal mandate. The restoration of the lost scrolls is not an optional exercise in spiritual curiosity. It is a legal mandate. Heaven's courtroom is not convened by emotional sincerity or religious ritual alone. It requires the presence of a full registry, names, covenants, timelines, bloodlines, and divine oaths. These were embedded in the scrolls that were actually torn from the Western canon. Their absence has not only severed memory, it has delayed justice. Now the remnant must recover and reassemble these scrolls, not to build a new religion, but to reestablish the legal foundation upon which the kingdom's authority operates. Without them, the registry is redacted. The witnesses are silenced. The testimony is incomplete. A sealed courtroom cannot render judgment, and heaven will not move until the full record is presented. You see, every seal matters. Every scroll matters. And the book of Adam reveals the origin of the testimony. Jubilees provides the divine calendar. Enoch exposes the crimes of the fallen. The cave of treasure traces the movement of bones. Meqabyan bears the martyrdom that sealed the witness in blood. Together, they make the stone readable. Together, they validate the registry and qualify the remnant to unseal the final covenant. And when that happens, when the scrolls are restored and the stone is read, heaven's throne is no longer vacant. The Lamb who was found worthy will open the seals, and the testimony will echo not in metaphors, but in courtrooms. And the beast will no longer sit uncontested. The legal authority of the Most High will be reinstated, and the earth, which grooms for this revelation, will finally see the true judgment. Not by sword, but by scroll. Not by myth, but by mandate. Part 6, Thrones of Men and the Crown of Blood. The thrones that replaced Eden. After mankind's exile from Eden, the divine registry was buried beneath layers of rebellion, forgetfulness, and counterfeit power. But Satan did not wait idly. He moved quickly to erect his own dominion, not through the breath of God, but through blood, force, and imitation. The thrones that emerged after Eden were not ordained, they were seized. They were not divine inheritances passed through covenant and breath, but forged altars fueled by conquest, sorcery, and generational manipulation. Nimrod's Babel was the first great attempt, a unified empire not under God's rule, but man's hubris. It wasn't merely a tower, it was a throne, a challenge to heaven's architecture, built on human sacrifice and centralized control. Well, this pattern echoed through every subsequent empire. Nebuchadnezzar claimed godhood through statue and decree. Pharaoh enthroned himself with the blood of Hebrew infants. Caesar merged temple and senate, crafting a throne that ruled by divine fiat and military terror. Constantine baptized it in Christian language, but the throne remained Roman. These thrones are not random. They are part of a single, evolving counterfeit, one that mimics heaven's courts with robes, rituals, scrolls, and judges, but is void of the breath that gives life. Satan's thrones have one unifying feature. They usurp registry by force. They offer inheritance through bloodlines, not righteousness. They enthrone kings who claim divine right, but whose crowns were forged in rebellion. And beneath them all, hidden but operative, lies a single objective: to replace Eden's registry with a beast system, one that controls who is remembered, who is erased, and who is enthroned. But the registry of God was never fully lost. It was hidden, and its throne still stands, not in Rome, not in Basel, not in Davos, but in Zion. No, not the Jews' Zion. And the Lamb, not Lucifer, will sit upon it. The families who claimed the throne. The thrones of men were not only claimed by emperors and kings, but by dynasties whose power operated behind veils of religion, finance, and global diplomacy. These families did not merely influence history. They authored its hidden chapters. The Orsini, Breakspear, Colonna, Aldobrandini, and Medici, all those families stood at the center of Rome's spiritual empire, functioning as priest-kings who blurred the line between church and state, altar and throne. They orchestrated crusades in the name of God, yet their true allegiance was to a system that exchanged divine breath for blood oaths. Through the Vatican and its Jesuit order, they administered sacrificial systems masked as religion and encoded Babylonian sorcery into canon law. As Rome transitioned from sword to banking, a new priesthood emerged. The Rothschilds, Warburgs, and Rockefellers became the high priests of debt, issuing legal overlays that governed nations through finance instead of faith. Their systems of control operated under maritime and commercial law, erecting a false court of global jurisdiction. Well, these were not mere bankers. They were scribes of a new registry, where a man's value was no longer measured by spirit, but by credit, birth certificate, and debt obligation. Through instruments like the Federal Reserve, IMF, and World Bank, they enshrined the rule of paper thrones, currency replacing covenant. But this was not just a Western project. The Li family dynasty of China, entangled with the Dent family and other Hong Kong lineages, brought Eastern spiritualism and legalism into the same beast system. Their opium empires, run with Jesuit blessings and Venetian trade logic, baptized the East into the West registry war. The merger was sealed through blood, finance, and cultural subversion, placing Asia within the same counterfeit kingdom. These families are not simply wealthy or influential. They are the legal custodians of Satan's global throne structure. Their power flows not from elections or economies, but from ritual succession, bloodlines maintained like spiritual dynasties. To them, dominion is inherited by genealogy, not granted by heaven. They mirror the priesthood of Christ, but offer no intercession, only manipulation. And while their crowns glimmer in gold in history books, they are nothing more than signposts of a counterfeit registry, one which the stone of witness will soon confront. The blood that bought the throne. The thrones of men were never established by diplomacy or wisdom alone. They were purchased in blood. Behind every crown lies a sacrifice, and behind every empire lies an altar. The families who ruled did not simply inherit lands. They inherited covenants, dark contracts renewed through generations of ritual bloodletting. They were not merely acts of conquest, but offerings of principalities, ensuring that power would not just be attained, but spiritually sanctioned by the forces of darkness. The Orsini and Breakspear dynasties understood this deeply, using war as both sacrament and strategy. The Medici funded inquisitions with the same reverence that pagan priests offered bulls at ancient temples. Well, in this hidden theology of power, the battlefield became the altar. Wars, revolutions, and assassinations were not geopolitical byproducts of disagreement or disorder. They were meticulously staged blood rituals. Each upheaval served to renew or transfer dominion. The French Revolution was not merely a cry for liberty, but a public execution of the old registry, decapitating the throne of divine right so it could be replaced by the financial scepter of the Rothschilds. The American Civil War was not just about states' rights, but about realigning economic bloodlines through sacrifice and debt. World War I, World War II were the twin baptisms of the modern beast system. Human life exchanged on a global scale to initiate a new world governance rooted in blood-led financial control. Each famine served a function. From Ireland to India to Ethiopia, famines were not always natural disasters. They were engineered blood offerings, economic sacrifices imposed upon populations to thin resistance and feed demonic jurisdiction. Assassinations were not political misfortunes. They were surgical blood seals, cutting down those who stood in the way of renewed thrones. Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy were not just presidents. They were threats to the bloodline order. This is the crown of blood. Thrones forged in slaughter, sustained by ritual and masked by history books. These are not simply powerful men and women. They are stewards of a spiritual domain that feeds on the shedding of innocent blood to maintain authority over the earth. But this counterfeit system trembles at the true testimony of Jesus Christ's blood, which speaks a better word than Abel's. The blood of the uncounterfeitable. The blood of the Lamb. It's not transactional. It's legal, eternal. When it is applied to the registry, it nullifies every false contract sealed by war, famine, and ritual. The blood that bought the true throne cannot be bought back, and no beast can sit where that blood still speaks. The rise of the legal straw man. With the visible fall of Rome, a more deceptive empire took its place. Not one built with swords and chariots, but with parchment and seal. The empires of stone gave way to empires of ink. In this shift, power moved from the throne room to the courtroom, from priests to notaries, from bloodline to legal fiction. The Vatican, in collaboration with the Crown Temple and Venetian financial dynasties, began constructing a system where every soul born into the world would be registered, not as a living being, but as a vessel, a number, a corporate entity. Thus was born the straw man. The straw man is not just a legal theory. It is the satanic mockery of the registry of heaven. Whereas heaven records names in the book of life tied to breath, covenant, and witness, the earthly beast system creates a parallel record, one rooted in debt, obligation, and maritime commerce. The birth certificate is not just a document. It is the moment when the state creates a fictional you, assigning your life as a collateral against the national debt. You became a vessel, floating in legal commerce, stripped of your spiritual identity, and governed by admiralty law, not by law of heaven. Well, this deception was not merely administrative, it was spiritual. It severed breath from body and witness from will. The true registry of heaven is voluntary, sacred, and relational. The satanic registry of man is coercive, transactional, and anonymous. The straw man turned the image of God into a commodity. Every signature, every license, every legal proceeding bound the individual not to divine justice, but to a false jurisdiction administered by earthly thrones in service to the beast. Corporations became the new kings. Trusts and courts replaced altars and covenants. The Pope became the trustee of souls. The banker became the priest, and the judge became the executioner. The entire system was built to invert Eden's model. Where man once walked in breath with God, now he drifts as a paper ghost through systems of legal manipulation, unable to speak his true name without consequence. The registry was stolen, not by burning the scrolls, but by replacing them with contracts. Yet heaven still remembers the names written before the foundation of the world. And those who reclaim their identity not as straw man, but as sons, will be the ones who overthrow this counterfeit system, not through war, but by restoring the registry. When breath returns to name and name returns to witness, the straw man will be exposed, and the throne of blood will fall. The Jesuit-Venetian crown swap. After the papal system reached its geopolitical peak, a more covert force assumed control: the Jesuits. Unlike traditional monarchs who ruled through title or inheritance, the Jesuits operated as spiritual lawyers, masters of canon law, confession, espionage, and covert diplomacy. They embedded themselves within every court of Europe, not to bless kings, but to own them. Through their role as confessors to emperors, they harvested secrets. Through their vast network of colleges and agents, they shaped succession, trade policy, and even war declarations. The thrones of Europe were not conquered, they were absorbed. This absorption relied heavily on the Venetian model. Venice, the serpent city of maritime commerce and occult finance, had long practiced rule through indirect control, leveraging wealth, loans, and papal alliances to place puppets on thrones while remaining hidden in shadows. When the Jesuits merged with this model, a global strategy was born: a marriage of priesthood and banking, of bloodline surveillance and trade law. No crown passed without their blessing. No war erupted without their signature. Well, the transition of power was not merely political, it was genealogical and spiritual. The Jesuit worked to rewrite the genealogies of Europe's royal houses, forging connections to ancient lines or biblical figures to justify thrones. Well, this was not lineage. It was legal fiction used to cement dominion. Those who resisted were excommunicated, overthrown, or assassinated. Blackmail became theology. Inheritance became extortion. The true crown, the one rooted in breath, registry, and Edenic inheritance, was suppressed in favor of thrones bought with lies. The crown swap was complete when the thrones of Europe no longer ruled by divine witness, but by Jesuit counsel and Venetian finance. The kings still wore their crowns, but they served their masters. Thrones that once claimed the sword now bowed to the pen, the ledger, and the confessional booth. This was the counterfeit kingdom, a hidden empire masquerading as spiritual authority, sealed not with oil, but with debt and blood. The beast that sits on many waters. The vision in Revelation 17 of the woman riding the scarlet beast has long been interpreted symbolically, but its fulfillment is painfully literal. The woman is Rome, clothed in purple and scarlet, drunk on the blood of saints, holding a golden cup of abominations. She rides a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns, global governance powered by fallen principalities. But the key phrase in John's vision is that she sits upon many waters. These are not oceans. They are jurisdictions, legal dominions, spiritual thrones cloaked as civil powers. Rome does not sit alone. Her daughters, London, Washington, D.C., Basel, each inherited part of the beast's authority. The Vatican rules through canon law and spiritual dominion. London governs the seas through admiralty and maritime codes. Washington projects military enforcement and war authority, and Basel, through the Bank for International Settlements, silently reigns as the priesthood of finance. These 4 form a quadrilateral throne, a counterfeit court that mimics the divine government of heaven but operates through contracts, oaths, and blood-purchased influence. Well, each of these domains holds a portion of heaven's stolen registry. Rome claims spiritual succession. London seizes the name and birthright of every citizen through registration. DC militarizes obedience through fear and force. Basel launders wealth and sin through unseen ledgers. These waters, jurisdictions of deception, have replaced Eden's river of life with the polluted flow of bondage. They sit upon the names, lives, inheritances, and bloodlines that were once part of God's witness registry. But now they are sealed behind maritime fictions and papal decrees. This is the true beast system. It is not just government, it is governance. Not just empire, it's enthronement. And it is legal. Yeah, they're getting away with it. It's legal. Jesus is allowing it. Now, the beast that sits on many waters has weaponized law against the breath of God. What was once registry has become registry twisted into chains. What was once covenant has become contract. And the woman, Rome, still rides the beast, drunk on her victory, unaware that judgment is written and the true throne is rising. The Bank for International Settlements. The Bank for International Settlements, headquartered in Basel, Switzerland, is not just a financial institution. It is the final throne of earthly dominion, often called the central bank of central banks. The BIS stands above every national treasury, untouched by electoral process, immune to regulation, and shielded by diplomatic privilege. It is the invisible crown worn by no king, yet honored by all rulers. This is the monetary seat of the beast, an altar of artificial breath where life is measured not by spirit or covenant, but by debt and digital compliance. The BIS does not mint coins or print paper. It mints obedience. It coordinates the issuance of fiat currencies, central bank digital currencies, and liquidity policies across all nations, silently determining who eats, who owns, who builds, and who bows. In its sterile vaults, breath is turned into barcode. Value is extracted from identity, and once flowed from heaven as provision, now flows from Basel as permission. Well, this throne offers no scroll, no witness, no spirit. It mimics the treasury of God, but replaces gold with metadata, inheritance with programmable allowance, freedom with biometric leash. Each human becomes a ledger entry, a tokenized asset in a global registry not built in Eden, but in a boardroom. The BIS requires no army, no flag. It conquers through consensus, and through its digital breath, it seduces even the righteous into captivity. What Rome began in blood and empire, the BIS now perfects through zeros and silence. It does not speak in decrees. It speaks in interest rates, settlement protocols, and blockchain governance. It is the priesthood of Mammon in its final form, the financial crown that sits not on a head, but over all thrones, watching, balancing, consolidating. And beneath its gaze, the nations unknowingly serve not Zion, but Basel. Not the lamb, but the ledger. Why the crown of blood is falling? Well, the crown of blood, forged by centuries of ritual, war, and legal manipulation, is falling because it was never built on truth. Its registry, constructed through deception, redacted scrolls, and false genealogies and stolen identities, is a counterfeit foundation. It cannot withstand the awakening of the true registry because it was never designed to reflect heaven's law. It was designed to impersonate it. As the sealed scrolls of the righteous are recovered, as the bones of the patriarchs speak from the earth, and as the breath of God returns to the remnant, the legal claims of the breath thrones collapse under the weight of divine evidence. False flags and engineered crisis no longer convince the watching world. The fiat currencies that they print have become meaningless digits that prop up collapsing empires. The apostate churches, once tools of their spiritual manipulation, are emptying, their hollow rituals exposed. Every instrument of the beast is weakening. Media no longer commands reverence. Banks no longer inspire trust. And even war fails to unite the nations under a common cause. This is not merely political failure. It's a legal collapse. The straw man cannot stand where the living witness rises. And what breaks the covenant of blood is not another rebellion, another empire, or another throne. It is the blood of the Lamb, not shed in secret but poured out publicly on the very mountain Adam named in his testament. This blood speaks louder than the rituals of the elite. It interrupts their chain of authority. It nullifies their contracts. It reclaims what they had usurped. And when this blood activates the registry, scrolls restored, breath revived, stones made legal, the kingdoms of this world will fall, not by force, but by revelation. The throne of men is shaking because the true throne is returning. The Zion throne, the legal counter witness. The throne of God in Zion is not the abstract symbol of divinity. It is a real, legal, and covenantal seat of judgment and authority. This is why the Zionist Jews stole it. I don't believe they're the real Jews. It's the synagogue of Satan. It is not floating in mysticism detached from the affairs of earth. It is rooted in a specific place, built upon a lawful testimony, and awaiting the final witness that will unseat every counterfeit crown. Zion is not just spiritual, it is geographic. It was chosen before time began. It was prophesied by Adam, testified by the prophets, and sealed with the blood of Christ. This throne cannot be activated by belief alone. It requires legal evidence, and that evidence is threefold: the bones of Adam, the breath of the Messiah, and the registry stone left behind in the earth. Adam's bones represent the inheritance of humanity, the original witness of man's dominion under God's breath. Christ's breath is the second witness. He is the second Adam, breathing life back into what was lost. And the stone, the final registry artifact, is the physical document of the divine claim. Well, these are not poetic symbols, guys. They are real legal elements of God's case against the thrones of men. And when the scrolls are restored, these three witnesses come together. The courtroom of heaven reconvenes. And from that courtroom, judgment proceeds not as revenge, but as correction. Not as war, but as a legal unsealing. The Zion throne will not strike with carnal weapons. It will speak. And its words, backed by registry, covenant, and breath, will collapse the empires built on lies. The Vatican will fall. The BIS will be silenced. The straw man will be exposed. For only one throne holds lawful dominion over heaven and earth. And it is not found in Rome, London, Washington, or Basel. It's found, it is in Zion, where righteousness reigns and where every other throne will be judged. All right, guys. We're going to end it there. God bless you. God keep you. God thank you. This has been Cause Before Symptom. We'll finish part 3 tomorrow night. And yeah, that's going to be great. So this has been a narration of my 4th book, The Stone That Speaks. I hope you're enjoying it just as much as I am. We'll see you tomorrow.
This has been Cause Before Symptom with your host, James Carner. Go to his website, jamescarner.com, and sign up for his newsletter. Also, download his free books on the breath war, the crown of blood, and the ritual machine. Fix your body by buying his award-winning detox formula, removing heavy metals and parasites. You'll feel better and live longer. Go to elitepotion.com. And one more thing, please. Just try and love your neighbor, because if you do, the world would be a better place. See you tomorrow.